Hi there, Randy Green here. A continuation of the previous 3 podcasts in this series of alternate human experience or experiences, or depending on how you want to put it. I want to explain a little bit more about the pull-ins I had that happened outside my home and not just during nighttime. But first and foremost, I had an experience in 2017 where I was in theta state, doing some self-healing, and then before I know of it, I was kind of viewing myself inside a laboratory where there were greys, and it was clearly on board a craft, and this traditional scenario that you see and have heard from people who have physically been abducted and pulled into other types of later incomer extraterrestrial groups that came in the 1950s and their craft where you were pulled into the 4th dimension. The differences between the experiences I have had is mainly sometimes I get too close to some of the other groups that came in the 1950s and then they pay me a visit. Again, holographically, energetically inside my head, showing themselves as a kind of a hologram in my head and communicating with me telepathically, because that's how these groups do. The experience I'm referring to, the first one I had back in 2017, where I really got the understanding of their capacity to pull in. How did I get that? Okay, first and foremost, it was done by the greys of the Arcturian lineages. They're a part of the old colonizing groups that chose to participate in the takeover of our solar system 15,000 years ago. The Arcturians go back to the 1-7 pillar, meaning that at some point far down in our solar system history, I used to collaborate with them, and with that they see it as their prerogative. That's one of the very important keywords here, to do what they're doing with me, because we once were in a project together, even though that they now have regressed and are playing on the fumes of a prerogative that does not stand. It's illegal what they're doing. It's not okay. It's not done with my consent, equally as it's not my consent and my choice to be born into the family I was born into. All of these are part of automated programs that are running as part of the colonization of our planet to ensure, as part of these colonizing factions, whatever they needed. And I'm not going to go into that here, because now I want to move beyond that, because we can't end up talking about that all the time, because that just gets boring. So the next level of the, sorry for saying that, because I've been talking about it for 20 years, for those of you newcomers, of course it's not boring, but it's so much more complex than just saying, oh, you're the harvesting of genetics. That's part of it. There's so much other going on. That's the other thing I want to share here as well. So what they showed me was, first and foremost, I was pulled in. And what is it that they pull in? They technically pull in your higher order energy system, that once you have activated that, you can, in a way, they can do different things. They can extract a little bubble that becomes an orb in their reality, and then you can remote view via the bubble or the orb what's going on, or they can pull you in. They can make a replication of your energy system and put it into a clone, and by that you can then open your eyes inside the clone, and then you can view what was going on. Here it was this kind of taking portions of my awareness, creating an orb, and then making me monitor what was going on while they were explaining. And the gray there, one of the taller grays, were explaining to me, that's the Arcturians, they're the taller grays. What are the groups? There are many different groups. Don't get confused here. We have many different types of groups, because it's a working machine that works in the 4th dimension. So if they're from a higher dimension, they will use grays inside this reality. The Arcturians are from the 7th dimension, but they use the grays inside our reality. These grays are taller. They have a different kind of a more whitish type of skin, whereas some of the Orion grays, they have a more kind of darker hue to their skin, etc., etc. So let's just put it into this context as well. Nothing is simple when we talk about this. Only those of us who have experienced the variety of the different groups, we know what we're talking about. Those who study it and read it and try to become masters in something they have studied from 10-hand sources is not what I'm dealing with here. This is my personal experiences. So the Arcturian Grey told me that they had now, which is a little bit, that's what did he actually say? I have here to be careful, because my mind was associating it with the physical abductions. And I now know that the physical abductions are done by the extraterrestrial groups that came in the 1950s that didn't know our system and were working with the clandestine military projects. And with that, we're doing all sorts of horrible stuff to humans as part of these programs. This Arcturian program were more similar to the original ways they have been conducting the pull-ins on of our civilization the last 15,000 years, going back to the prior podcasts that explains the history of us, including the podcast series of 4 that I have put in the Next Level of Activation podcast series that explains what's going on right now. So I would say, okay, when we look back at some of these things, we must adjust it to the next level of information that we have got when we revisit all types of memories. And why am I revisiting it? Because it kind of lingers on and I need to share it and then clean it out and then give it as a foundation of some of the knowledge I have. So I was pulled in. It wasn't an orb. I was remote viewing it. Through my awareness, I was fully aware of my body in the bed. I was completely lucid. There was no pull-ins. There was no physical go through the walls, whatever. That's primitive. These groups of the colonial species, they have been here for as long as we have the understanding of this last leg of human civilization. And prior to that, but back then, we were part of these civilizations, not Arcturians, but advanced solar system or systemic civilizations that were operating the 4th, 5th, and 6th dimension and upwards and had full awareness capacities and higher order sciences and were involved in all of these very, very advanced level of the true universal structure that we have been deprived of due to different reasons and purposes, as I explained in other podcast series, including the ones that prelude to this one. So I don't have to keep explaining it. And that's for those of you who just jump in here, you need to go back and listen to the other stuff. Stop jumping in just what you want to listen to and go in and get the full context. Otherwise, information will be lost and you won't achieve what you're trying to achieve. Everything needs to be very detailed and elaborate to truly understand what's going on. You can't skip steps. It's not about getting there first. It's about getting there correctly. Okay, so he showed me these different groups are notoriously male. There are few what we understand as females, but yeah. Anyways, there are dissimilar types of information here. I was just listening to some of the witness statements from Stephen Greer and some of the things he has. There's a Doty, I can't remember what he's called first name, but Doty as his last name, and he's talking about 4 different species that they retrieved in some of the crashes, of which one had boobs, and that the males kind of had productive organs, that kind of a gland, and I'm just kind of. Yeah, that doesn't add up with what I know of the groups I have seen. And that could be because these perhaps are newer groups. Perhaps they're a part of some of the groups that are playing around with reproductive organs, because I've seen some of the projects, the Greys don't have it. Some of the Greys, they want it because it gives them pleasure, similar like it does with humans. So they are tampering with their genetics so they get access to some of these pleasures. Does it mean that the females can produce offspring? We don't know. It depends on, is it the android Greys? Absolutely not. Is it the semi-organics? Perhaps it's the fully organics. Well, that's definitely a possibility. But if the Greys that are here are working here because they're part of some kind of project. Anyways, you see how all these questions must be asked. And really, I don't know unless I was capable of talking to one of the Greys that were a part of the 1947 crash. Don't know. So we're only seeing what we're seeing, so we don't know. We're disassociating with it. That's similar to us because that's what we know from our biology. But what I know from the realities I come from originally, having reproductive organs is unnatural. It's an abomination to grow another human in your body. Yuck. So aside from me actually having been pregnant, that was the weirdest experience in my life. And no, I did not have all of the traditional ways of perceiving that. I perceived it from my understanding of reality. Anyways, it is what it is. And for those who then spin off, oh, what kind of mother have you then been, and what kind of thing? I will say my offspring has become one of the most beautiful human beings ever, because I made it into a full understanding that because that happened, then whatever came out of it had to be one of the best functional humans ever to be on this planet. So I've done my due diligence there in all ways and forms that is human possible. Okay, so just closing that down, because that's not about what we are talking about here. That Arcturian were showing me that he said, we now, and I wonder about the now, because there are two situations there. He said, we now have the capacity to not pull you in physically, but actually just do it energetically. And he was an Arcturian, I have no doubt about that. So what I'm wondering right now is, did he use an overlay, presenting himself to be another species than he actually was? Because we know some of the negative grays, they are definitely playing around with our mind and are using overlays to trick us into, quote unquote, being okay with what's going on. And with that, seeing that and not objecting, then that was, yes, now I got it. That was the triggery to get me to give consent to the pull-ins, which I now retract and say, that was triggery, that's illegal, that is none of your business, that's not in alignment with the original colonizing species that have done that to humanity for a long time, but mostly for healing purposes or adaptation purposes if it was necessary for specific projects that we could see benevolent. This experience, which I now am declining and saying a clear no on all levels of my being, is including my higher levels awareness, and I'm literally blasting the orb and give what I didn't get at the time. That's why it pops up. I'm doing a clear no and standing sovereign in my boundaries of consciousness and saying, I'm not accepting that. That's not part of my trajectory. And you tricked me into giving consent by giving me information that mimicked a race that I used to collaborate with. And with that, that's trickstery. It's trickster. It's false pretense. And by that, it has no legal ground in any councils, not even in the councils of the regressed races. And by that technology that's attached to that and the ability to pull me in energetically is hereby annulled and annihilated, and is no longer standing in the grounds. It no longer has legit consent inside this reality. First and foremost, I didn't say yes. Secondly, it was on false pretense. Thirdly, it was done by a group that I do not collaborate with, that I do not have energetic or genetic affinity with. And I don't know what I'm. Thirdly, it is absolutely an abomination to do that kind of thing to someone who's been tricked into giving consent when it actually is on false grounds, which annuls it all and is no longer viable in any worlds. And that means I now need to go to this technology that's upholding that. Sorry, I'm doing energy work here at the same time, which I do in my mind. I expand my awareness into my holographic-energetic architecture, and from there I can clear out that technology that's holographic-energetic in attached to my field. So that's why I can clear it out and clear that out there, including the symbols and the code sequences and the different types of imprints that are allowing that to happen to my energy system. And that's on the 7th dimensional level. So then I put in the right code systems and recalibrate so that is no longer attached to that false version of the Arcturians, which, you know, I've been in contact with a couple of times. Okay, so that first initial event that kind of gave the quote-unquote consent, which is no consent, and it's a foot down, not accepting this was false pretense, and by that has no ground. I can then go in and find the disk in the library of the original Arcturian collaboration and actually, like a piece of paper, destroy that so that whatever is in the holographic architecture of our solar system, where I have alliances with specific groups with the Arcturians, is now annulled and annihilated and no longer have any ground. So nobody can play on that one and say that they claim the prerogative of the collaboration with that species that dates back to these eras of our solar system, where I was in a higher order aspect of and a version of myself from where I was collaborating in the 7th dimension with the original Arcturians. That group no longer exists. What they are today are just sad androids that are under the control of the different groups that are now controlling our reality field. From being a very proud species, they have now become slaves themselves. Okay, so with that understanding, I can annihilate that and then perhaps hopefully collapse that field that has been put into me that are enabling them to pull me in, which would be one of the eureka, yoo-hoo moment. If that actually is what I needed to do, that would be such a great thing for me, because every end of the month I'm going through this horror show with these artificial beings that are doing horrible things to my clones due to this ability that they can pull me in and put a replication of my energy system into these clones, and then it ripples into my physicality and technically downsize and take away everything I've been doing to build a higher order kind of energy system during the month. At the end of the month, they annihilate all of that by pulling me in and doing what they're doing to me and lowering my field to the degree of almost death of my biological field. Because when my clones get their heads ripped off and die, and it's plenty of them, they're doing it to the degree that is necessary, all that ripples into my body, and my body thinks I'm dying, so I have to go through every month, at the end of the month, all the horror show and all the psychological trauma that comes from that. I'm getting better at that. But then I also have to tell my body and disconnect, this is not you, this is what's going on, and tell my body what's going on every month, because it gets just as confused every month when that is happening. What is rippling into it, it thinks it's its own. The body doesn't know better. Okay, so with that said, then I had the experience on the abandoned airbase in Denmark, where I used to live, where I kind of felt called out. That came after that quote-unquote false consent that is no longer consent. So the next line of that was that I went out there and I was walking out on that abandoned airbase that is now a nature park, if you like. People can come or go as they like. It's open for public. And I was walking on one of the runways, and there at the end of one of the runways where the plane would typically taxi in and wait, I would feel this stand there, and then I stood there, and then I felt this fourth dimensional craft hovering above me. And then I had this glitch. And that meant that glitch was kind of, I lost 1 second of my awareness, so to speak. It happened so quickly that if you had standing next to me, it would be like a blink of an eye. You wouldn't have noticed it. I've experienced that later on, not to the same degree, but similar. And the reason why I know something happened was, first, step one, I had the sensation of the craft above. I got the warning something's going to happen. Thirdly, when I came back, so to speak, a split second later, I had a whole long memory of being on board that craft and being shown different things on that craft, which I've forgotten now. And it is now being erased because I annihilated the other stuff. What they did there was pulling me in physically, but it was so short, because they had already done the other thing prior, that they already had my energy system. So the physical pulling in was easy and could be done within the fourth dimensional laws of reality, meaning that they could go outside of time and back into time, putting me together in a sequence, because the body technically in our reality, which we know reality is a series of nows, so it glitches. It goes, literally just goes so quickly that you don't see it. Similarly, like we don't feel the earth is rotating in 10,000 kilometers an hour, right? We're not seeing that, or per minute, or whatever it is, because we're part of the field of it, so we're not noticing how it moves in space. And similar with the body, as we're part of the reality around us, but it does change. It is in this state of flux all the time. It's kind of what we're seeing with virtual particles, or particles, just electrons in their rings, that they're gathering momentum, climbing up and falling back into a lower ring, climbing up and falling back into a lower ring, which gives the kinetic energy that gives radiation, the photoenergetic effect, as Einstein talked about, etc., etc. So we are having, it's part of reality. That's how it works. Okay, so with that, I kind of, you get the sensation, people who are in contact with these different groups, whether they are of the old type or the new type, they get warnings beforehand. They're kind of the ones that are good at observing crafts. Most of them get, go out, take your camera with you, it's now. And you do that, you get that understanding. Often they know the night before. Australian Skies is a guy that talks about this. There are others that have been talking about that, that they kind of, they feel how they get re-engineered during the night, and then they wake up in the morning, and then they know, today I'm going to see a craft, and they go out and they see it, or whatever that is. And that's possible that is the new version of the pull-ins. that they can do that because they now know to go in and out of a reality because they master it so much. And that's perhaps what that false Arcturian said. Or one of the ones that it could be a renegade Arcturian that was shifted aside to the new groups. That could also be it. And then going in and giving the pre-warning. Anyways, I got a glitch there as well because it's now just all erasing, which is good. That's why I needed to talk about it. And you see, this is where when we talk about this, it takes me years to get to the point where I actually feel comfortable talking about it, because there are all sorts of, aside from the trauma and all of the horrible stuff, because there's this ridicule and you feel it's all in my head and you can't prove it, and you can kind of feel a little bit ashamed of why you are living like that and everybody else is living a beautiful, normal life. What had I done? Just to discover that this is actually not something you have done. That's why I'm so adamant in saying I did not choose that, because whenever people say, well, I made a contract with that. Yeah, well, you're under enslavement then. That's good on you. You do, whatever you sold your soul to achieve whatever that is. That's your choice. But I did not choose this. I would not in any world choose a life like this. It's ridiculously unlawful. So I would not choose that. So it's done to me. Not that it victimizes me. Not at all. That's not what we're talking about. It did in the beginning, not anymore. Not when you go through so many different stages of the processes of being part of these projects. You either succumb to them and you turn nuts, or you begin to grow a pair of and begin to really understand that this goes against all the original rules. And that's part of the awakening process too, to understand the rules of advanced civilizations, to understand the principles of progressive advanced civilizations, so that we can have something to compare with, and not just like children that are being briefed into stories that they concoct for us, so that we are not to be manipulated with. They will still manipulate with us, but when we get the sovereignty of actually understanding what's going on from a consciousness level, and are stepping into our energetic boundaries that follows our consciousness potentials, not an energetic boundary, it's a consciousness boundary that gives sovereignty, then you have another playbook you step into. You get other tools you can work with that are more in alignment with what we call law sets of extraterrestrial and interdimensional groups. And that is what part of the awakening, and that's the main thing that they've been trying to get us away from. Hence, it's easy to say they're harvesting my genetics. I know they're using them for different things and all that, and I can tap into different stories. I can clear out, so they get less and less quote unquote prerogatives to do what they are doing, until I can trial them holographically within the regress races councils. And then they can say, well, they're traitors, they're no longer part of our faction, and I will say, still your responsibility, they're part of your lineage. Whether or not we want it, those who were part of original consciousness lineage are still under our responsibility. And that's why I'm still pulled into the different projects that were part of what I originally gave consent to as part of the original solar system civilization I once was part of during the times of Lemuria. So that's part of these things that we are to activate and understand the political game and the games of law, which also, when we listen to Stephen Greer and he's saying that those who are part of these clandestine projects, the black projects, they think they are under what we could kind of call an oath or silence or whatever. I keep forgetting what it's called, a non-disclosure contract. But they're technically not, because it's a contract that is on false premises. It's on false pretense. It's within a project that's not acknowledged by the American government, and by that is unconstitutional. And the same goes with when we talk about extraterrestrials and what they're doing here. There are laws in the extraterrestrial worlds, but they are circumventing it because we don't know better. He wants to be fooled. Remember, let him be fooled. That's an old Roman saying. And if we don't know what we have of rights that is in alignment with our consciousness potentials, that's been integrated into a human form and are part of our everyday awareness, not just when we sit in meditation or go into theta state, but part of who and what we are externalized into our physical form, is it going to be difficult to really claim sovereignty? Because if you're not in full contact with all your capacities, you can't claim sovereignty. You can't claim this is illegal. It's not just about saying, it's about also, as I just showed here, I go into the memory, I clear out the timelines, I go to the library, I get the technology, I get the origin, I find the root of the contract that used to be there that gives them false quote-unquote prerogatives because, and I know, no, it was not one of the later groups, but one of the original Arcturus that had deflected and by that could claim original prerogative as part of an original project where we were collaborating. But it's not collaborating, creating clones of me and misusing it. That's not collaboration. Nobody would give consent to that. So they're always making it more pretty to get control. It's all about getting control of our energy system and tricking us into saying yes to things that we wouldn't say yes to. And we're not saying actually yes, they're just showing it to us and telling us what we're doing. And because we're not saying no, that's illegal on the right level of energy and consciousness. And getting to the original consent that was given by as a collaboration a long time ago. What is going on with these races, because they have been twisted and their minds are perverted, literally, then they're still thinking that they're doing a legit project inside this reality, where it's kind of turned into an insane lunatic project. You see the mad scientist syndrome. They suffer from that. So they are delusional in what is actually, they are still seeing it as genetic modification that assists them. Oh yeah, by the way, we then trade off 30% to a scavenger race that are then doing stuff. Oh yeah, no, we think it's more accurate to preserve you and take care of you, that we take away some of the thing you've been working with because you're not ready to move to the next level yet, blah, 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 blah. All of that is none of their business. They are not my superiors. Just because I'm in this reality in the outer domain, then in the seventh dimension, doesn't make them better than me. It doesn't make them more advanced when they're doing things like this. So the fruit of the tree, you know the tree by its fruits. The actions they're doing, how they're operating, the level of manipulation, the level of control, and what they're using this for. And as far as I've been going on here, I've just been able to clear the imprint of it. And I hope, by going into this memory and putting the dots together and saying, they had the energetic and then they had the physical. And that's why they have been able to get to me. Then hope that that group at least has now been erased and eradicated from my field. So it will take a lot of things for them to get access to me, that they would have to do it all over. And if that then comes into play, well, then hopefully this time I'll be better at shutting it down and knowing what to go for, so I can repeat the cycle. As I know when I went through the fourth dimension on the lower levels with the insectoids, it was this kind of repeat sometimes over 2 or 3 years before I got to the root of it. And this pulling in every the end of the month, I've been trying to find the root of that for 8 years now. So I hope that this might actually, by sharing this experience, actually leads to the root. And by that prerogative no longer stands as an energetic contract, because it is an energetic contract that was done a long time ago, but it was on a different project and has nothing to do with what they're doing now. That has come to play or into existence because their mindset is now so mad scientist perverted that whatever they're creating and explaining to themselves that why it's okay for their own survival has nothing to do with me. They're literally like thieves and thugs and taking things that are not theirs to take. Okay, so just so we begin to understand some of these experiences that we have, there are some that have made contracts, and we have heard that over the course of history. Some of the avians that got taken by some of the different extraterrestrial groups that were traversing our structure or our quadrant when it fell under the hands of the Dracos, they did go into these contracts and to buy themselves out. What they didn't know was that contract was going to go over several lifetimes, and eventually they forget that they said yes to that contract, and still illegal because it was a contract that was done in another dimension, in another reality field, and then they were transported here, and then every time they get in contact, they get this, oh, you made that contract, which is completely illegal because you're no longer that being. It doesn't no longer that reality where you did it, so it doesn't stand. And that's why they have to renew and trigger us in this reality to reconsent to something that happened something else and can't be transferred into this reality. Super important rules of engagement that must be understood when we talk about extraterrestrial groups. And that's the next step of our understanding of what it means to become of an advanced civilization. Are you one that plays by the rule book? Or are you one that's gone rogue? So that's the next step of the questions that we need to ask ourselves. And again, the transition sciences, the template sciences, and the reconfiguration sciences, and the energy clearing work explains this more in details, including the rules and principles and laws and choices of living, and why we should follow these to the dot. Because when we come to the work with energy, if we don't follow these rules and laws and principles to the dot, then we create distortion. And when we create distortion, we get dragged to the regress timelines. And when we get dragged to the regress timelines, we come under the regress races and their distorted version of the original laws and how they unfold them. And that's a whole other game that makes it very, very complicated. As I said, they are like thieves and thugs that are bending reality to what they want it to be, similar like they're forcing humans to bend reality to their control systems and what they want us, the narrative they want us to have, so that they can trick us again and again to consent to their very distorted type of reality that plays on the edge of all karmic laws, including using androids to do so they don't get the physical or organic feedback loop of their actions, but only get it as a kind of energetic on a higher dimensional level that they can clean out in different ways and forms. So technically, by being an android inside this system, they're not creating karma inside this system, which then does not put them under the processes of entropy that we have here in the outer domain that leads to what we call death, or the need to shed off a physical form to get into another. But of course, the androids are not eternal. The semi-organics have to shift body from time to time. And each time they do that, then their genetics get a little bit more depleted. And that's part of some of the relooping they're doing inside this reality, so they can avoid doing the shifting between different types of vessels that is depleting them. So that's the only thing that's depleting them. So they manipulate reality to keep their genetics going for as long as possible, including relooping and making us do all sorts of weird, stupid stuff that they have prerogatives to work here, including prerogatives to harness our type of energy units and consciousness potentials, replicating that to extend their own existence. All right, I know for those of you who have not been in this game, this is an overwhelming amount of information, but just bear in mind, you can go to the Whole Future Humanities YouTube channel, where I have a lot of explanatory videos. The HAL Academy course material, you could go through that. I got 6 books out there. They are a little bit kind of, some of it is not accurate anymore, but still gives a good foundation. And then I've got the Higher Awareness Lifestyle YouTube channel, where you can find information too. There are so many levels of information that I have been producing for exactly getting to this point in time where I can just talk freely, because now it's my time to just share my experiences as they are on their own level and get that off my chest. That's a giving over, where I have done all the steps and produced all the materials for those who want, so they can get to this level of awareness and then do that type of work that is necessary to do to continue the progression journey that those of us who are part of the original solar system, and by that paid my dues to the councils and the different groups I have collaborated with, because the last 10 years, or more or less since 2007, has been nothing but clearing up the mess after the Pillar Project and what it was turned into. Without my knowledge, I must say that, because I left before the Atlantean Project, and then my projects were taken over by someone else within my lineage, and that person chose to develop it into something that I would never have accepted. But I'm still here to clean up the mess, because it's my lineage, it's my project, it's my responsibility. All right, so with that said, I'll end this little podcast. Thank you.